Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. Tonight we're going to talk about the book 101 Ways You Can Help, How to Offer Comfort and Support to Those Who Are Grieving, written primarily by my dear friend Liz Aleshire. Now those of you who watch Page One regularly will remember Liz from her segment Wisdom for the Weekend Writer. Liz, that's because Liz, like many of us, worked full-time and knew that sometimes if you're writing and the only time you have is on the weekend, she would help find a way so that you could maximize that time and get a lot of productive time in a limited amount of time. By profession, Liz was an accountant. She was also a journalist. She had hundreds of newspaper articles to her credit. She was the author of several nonfiction books published by some pretty major publishing houses, including Doubleday or Random House. She was also a member of the International Women's Writing Guild, where she taught for more than 20 years. And she was one of those experts on one of those popular online sites where people go to get information on a number of topics. Now, Liz sold the idea for the book, 101 Ways You Can Help, at a conference of the New Jersey romance writers in February of 2008. She was supposed to complete the book by the end of May, but when illness made it impossible for her to finish that book, 6 of us stepped in, 6 writers, all members of the International Women's Writing Guild. We stepped in to finish the book for her. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, in part 1 of this particular Page One, you met 2 of the 6 writers. Well, I guess 3 if you count me. But the 2 you met were Paula Chafee-Scardamalia from New York and Kathleen Barrick from Connecticut. Tonight I'm going to introduce you to 2 more of those writers. To my right is Frazier Walradt from New Jersey. Thanks for being here, Anne.
Thanks for inviting me.
And Judy, formerly of Wisconsin and now of Massachusetts. Thanks for being here tonight.
You're welcome, Zita.
You both had quite a drive to get here, and I really appreciate that you're doing this. Now, the other writer, Marcia Brown from Massachusetts, is not able to be with us tonight, but I'll get her input in here because we certainly worked closely enough together. We can do that. Now, for Liz, it was Mother's Day weekend, just a few weeks before the first deadline of her book, when she had the first heart attack. She had another heart attack the following week, and it was clear that she was not going to make that May 31st deadline. And her editor, Shana Drays at Source Books, gave her an extension of 2 months. So the book was now due, finished book, by the end of July. And I know we all remember in the middle of July, things went downhill very, very fast. And there was a point, Anne, when, because we're all friends long before working on this project, and Anne you knew that Liz's health was failing, but there was the moment there where we were optimistic and we thought, is this a matter of just, come on, Liz, you can do it. And you sent a particular email, a very special message. I don't know if you remember it or not.
I remember it.
Good. What did you say?
I threatened Liz.
Yes.
I told her that if she didn't get better right quick and get working on that book, that I would come to Connecticut and finish it for her.
Yes, you did. And I brought that message to Liz in the hospital. I read the email, and I tried to do your voice. And she smiled, and she said, very seriously, I've been thinking about that. And we had a long talk. In fact, this was, now fast forward a little bit to the middle of July, when things had gotten really bad. And I had a talk with Liz that night in the hospital, and we talked about the threat that you had so humorously sent to her, but there were very real implications. I went home that night and I emailed you And Judy, I emailed you. I emailed Paula Scardamelia and Kathy Barrick, who you met in the first show. I emailed Marcia Brown. And I said, in part, that even if Liz qualifies, she doesn't want the heart transplant. There's no way she can meet the deadline of July 31st unless we help. I'm being presumptive, I know. So if you can't participate, or if you would just rather not, let me know. Ever the optimist, here's the list of where we need help, and here are the names where I'm suggesting here are your assignments. Because at that point, Liz had outlined the whole book, but she had only finished about 2/3 of it, and the other third required a lot of research, some interviews with people. There was a lot of work still to be done. And I know within 24 hours or less, all of you responded immediately, absolutely, yes, tell me what you need me to do, give me my assignment. And that's when the writing frenzy began. So the beauty of the final product, I think, is the fact that we were able to maintain Liz's voice. I know Shayna Drays at Sourcebooks commented that it was seamless. So that said, I do want to talk a little bit about the topics some of the things that we worked on in the particular book. Anne, tell me some of the things that you worked on, or better yet, let me ask you, because I know some of the things you worked on. And one of my favorites, the whole thing about breakfast. Tell me about that.
Well, I suggested that when you take food, you should take breakfast. It's particularly helpful on the morning of the funeral because people are very busy. But when people bring food, they often bring casseroles. You get so many, the freezer overflows. Yes. And gets out of hand. Yes. Breakfast is really, really helpful. A neighbor did that when my father died, and I decided that would be my mission from then on, was to take breakfast to everybody.
That's a good mission. Now you also wrote one of the tips that had to do with children, with watching for children. Tell us a little.
Children. When people go into grief and they're busy making arrangements, funeral arrangements, and so forth, particularly if they're small children, someone needs to be watching those children all the time. And that's something a neighbor or friend can do very easily. You may not be able to, you can't make decisions about services, but you can certainly keep an eye on the children and keep them safe. They're so at risk at that time.
They really are. Judy, let me go to you for a moment. Some of the topics you did the research and worked on, I know one of them was about writing a eulogy.
Yes, well, my feeling was that you ask somebody to do a eulogy, and they start to hyperventilate. And what Liz understood was breaking things down into pieces.
Yeah.
So I broke it down into pieces. Offer to do the eulogy, and here's how to do it. You're not kissing off a Roman senator.
Yes.
You're talking about someone people know and love, and bringing that person back to life, especially 3/4 of the way through what can be a really sometimes very hard, grueling service, can be a service to everyone.
Now, I also know in your own private life, for quite a while, you had your own consulting business, and you dealt with some major corporations and helped people deal with things like moving and the whole idea of the transition. So it was no surprise to me that Liz said, oh, well, here's the topic about, when you're close enough to someone, because Liz organized the book in sections. When you know somebody casually, like maybe you share a hobby together, when you're a coworker, and then there's the section about when you're a really close friend or a family member. And when you're a really close friend or a family member, chances are you pretty comfortable and when you have access to certain information and you can have the freedom to make certain suggestions. Tell us a little bit about the piece that you wrote about helping with some of those hard decisions.
Well, let's face it, when you have been thrown over Niagara Falls in a barrel, it's not the easiest time to be rational.
Yes.
But there are certain life circumstances where it's going to happen. So being prepared for it and being a help. I did a workshop for women for many years called the New PMS Post-Move Syndrome, that it takes 3 to 5 years for someone who's not in another crisis to recover from a move. So how do you help someone?
Yeah.
Things like offering to organize some neighbors to come together to clean the house for an open house. Putting someone in touch with a realtor that you actually trust. Giving them a going away party even if they're moving across the street, and making it a ritual. Bringing plants.
There's so many practical things. I think that was part of the beauty of Liz's book. It was so practical. You also talked about keeping a journal, buying a journal, keeping a journal. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's another one of those hyperventilation topics. Most of the people you're dealing with, and Liz realized, are not writers.
Yeah.
But most people can write when given a structure. That was one of her grace notes.
Yes.
So what I suggested was giving someone a journal, and on the top of each of the first 10 pages, writing a suggestion. The best meal we ever shared was. The craziest time we had on vacation was. And after number 10, looking back and reading all the things I've written, I can now see. So, because one of the keys to grief is not only being able to express emotions, but being able to go back and reflect and put them together.
Very true. And I think one of the things that Liz talked about that we all recognize was she would often say that, and I don't remember what her source was, but that to help the grieving process, the person who was grieving had to tell at least 100 people the story and talk about the person who had died and talk about that feeling of grief. And that with people not wanting to hear that, how do you get to tell your 100 people if nobody wants to listen? So that was a key point. Now, Marcia Brown, who is, was not able to be...
Who's here?
She's here, certainly here in spirit with us, absolutely. Right here with the flowers, over here too. But one of the things that Marcia researched was helping with the funeral. And she also did some research on reading body language so that when you come up to someone, do you feel comfortable, opening your arms and hugging, or is it this shaking hand? Because some people are very, very touchy-feely, and some people are put off by that. So she did a lot of that, but I think the big thing she talked about was the website. What can you do to put up a website or a video testimonial, and a number of again, very practical suggestions. Also, Marcia talked about programs for grieving children, because she herself had been in a situation where she married a man who, from an earlier marriage, had 3 children, and shortly after Marcia and Daniel married, the children's biological mother died. And so Marcia, who had had no children of her own, opened her arms as wide as possible and said, "Bring me those children." I mean, she just drew them in, but that's not always the way it is. And then she even said that her thought at the time was, it would be better if when the children are trying to talk about their mother, I turn their thoughts to something happier. She realized after the fact, working on Liz's book, that the children need to talk about it. So we all learn something in the process, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. I know one of the things that the areas I worked on was the idea of physical healing through nutrition and spiritual healing, sometimes through aromatherapy. My daughter, being an herbalist and knows a lot about aromatherapy. Also, I did a piece about making sure that the bereaved is as financially stable as possible. Now, obviously, that's not the sort of thing you do for someone who is a coworker or a casual friend, but if you're really close to someone, if it's a family member, yes, you sit down and you have that conversation. Are you getting the bills paid? Sometimes the person in grief, they simply can't think about, oh, I need to pay the electric bill, or I need to pay the mortgage. The mind just doesn't go there. So there were those sorts of things. So, Judy, one of the things I do want to get a perspective on, because as I mentioned earlier, we were all 7 of us, counting Liz, members of the International Women's Writing Guild. And that connection was very important to Liz in terms of picking people to finish the book. So why do you think that was important to her?
I think I was doing a workshop in Ohio, and on the Sunday morning the people were leaving, and this was an IWWG workshop. People were talking about what they learned and where they were going, and one of the women said, "I'm going back to where people don't quite get me." I think a lot of us who are writers, a lot of us who are women who are perhaps a little bit different,
Yes.
sometimes feel that we go into a world where people don't quite get me.
Yes.
But walking into the IWWG conferences, whether they're regional or it's the big one, all of a sudden you're surrounded by people who are showing you passionate attention and listening, and all of a sudden you realize that there are lots of people out there who get you. I think
Yes.
Liz felt that, and
I
we
think
felt
so.
that from her.
I think that's the same. Now, when Liz and I had that conversation in July 16th, she had very specific reasons for picking the six of us. So, Anne, why do you think Liz picked you?
She picked me because she and I share an irreverent sense of humor.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, that's for sure. And I know because of the subject matter in the book, the tendency is to get, very, very heavy energy in that book.
She also picked me because when she'd come to visit me a couple of years before on a weekend, I said to her, "Tell me about Nathan." And she told me that she needed 100 people to talk to Nathan about. As you said,
Yeah.
I was number 20.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what, 1.2 a year? Terrible rate.
Terrible, terrible rate. And especially when you think about, I would walk into Liz's apartment, and I don't care what time of year it was, but she had a Christmas tree up in the living room, and many of the ornaments were the little homemade ornaments that had, little tiny pictures, and they were pictures of her friends, children, and grandchildren. There were magnets of Nathan, all over the refrigerator, and there were little ornaments of him as well. But she surrounded herself with pictures of other people's children and grandchildren. Judy, why do you think Liz picked you?
Liz picked me because over the table, after people had left over many summers, we realized that we both belonged to the sorority no one else wants to join. We were members of the Sisterhood of Women who have buried their sons.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not the sorority anybody wants to be part of. But I know from things Liz said that she knew you understood that when you have a shared history, some words don't have to be said. That it's just understood.
I was the reality check.
Yes, you were. Absolutely. I know for all of us, for all six of us who were involved, there was also the fact that we had experienced the pain of a profound loss, whether in the immediate years or many, many years gone by, as was in my case, and sometimes the things just don't change. So she definitely had her reasons for wanting all of us to be involved. And I know, as I mentioned with Marcia, well, now that I think of it, initially, it was Mother's Day weekend. Liz had an appointment to interview Marcia. Liz was going to interview Marcia for the book to talk about creating the video memorial and the website. And Marcia emailed me the next day and said, I tried to call Liz a couple times, and Liz never called me to keep the appointment, and I tried to get in touch with her, and there wasn't any answer. And that was because at that point, she had driven to the hospital. She didn't know what was happening, but it turned out to be the first of several heart attacks. Mild, which was why we thought that there would be recovery. But, it turned out that the doctors said she had had at least a dozen of those little small, those silent heart attacks that so many women have and don't realize it. There's a lesson for all of us, in there. One of the things I want to ask the two of you to do, if you would, is to take a look at Liz's book. There's a section she has in there about the basic do's and about the basic don'ts. And I particularly would like you to focus on the basic don'ts, because that was really the impetus for writing this book. And also just to make sure the viewers in the audience know, if they didn't see the first show, Liz's son Nathan was 16 when he died of bone cancer. And as Kathy Barrick said on the earlier show, for more than a dozen years, Liz wrote this book in her head because this was to be the tribute to Nathan, and also to be a book that would help people so that they wouldn't make the mistakes that so many people made in trying to comfort Liz, but saying the wrong things. So let's go through the don'ts. Who's going to start?
This is a section where you really hear Liz's voice. So I'm going to be Liz's voice.
Okay.
And Anne's going to be one of the well-intentioned people
Okay.
who say
All
the
right.
things that are repeated over and over again, wanting to help,
All
but
right.
not having read the book, not
Okay.
realizing that it doesn't help.
Okay, so you'll be Liz,
Okay.
and
I'm
then you're the
Liz.
helpful person.
Okay.
Okay.
She's in a better place.
I don't care if she's in Tahiti, belting down margaritas and surrounded by handsome hunks. I want her here.
At least he went quickly.
Yeah. So quickly, I never got a chance to say, I love you, one more time.
At least her suffering is over.
Well, she could have suffered a little longer.
What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
You forget The Walking Dead.
I knew someone who...
Someone's worse off than me? By golly, I feel better.
Sure you do.
You should be happy for how long you did have him.
Well, I would have liked to have had him just a little longer.
Come on, pal. Men don't cry.
Well, maybe they should. They don't heal either.
You really can hear Liz's voice.
Don't say God or Buddha, Mother Nature, Allah, the universe, or the Great Pumpkin never gives us more than we can handle.
Boy, have they overestimated me.
You need to get on with your life.
Yeah, and I bet you have the answer to world peace, too. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yes, and of course in the book, these little sections, there's elaboration on each of those sections, but this does give you the idea. And I know one of the things Liz talked about was that moment that she described as shocked selfishness. And that was where these comments, the true comment from the bereaved was coming from. And the bereaved, there's no way of avoiding that shocked selfishness. That's just part of what it is. Now, I want to ask you couple other questions. Now, in mid-August of 2008, Judy, we all gathered at your house on the Cape, and we were there to do the first round of edits on the book. While we were there, prearranged by Liz, who was in the hospital and at that point could talk on the phone. We'd made arrangements that she was to call. She had a certain order in which she wanted to speak with each of us, and she asked each of us what had we learned from finishing the book for her, working on the book. Judy, do you remember what
I
you
did.
said? And would your answer be the same now?
It would, in spades. I said, Liz, I realize what an amazing teacher you are and how right you are, because in 1994 I took a workshop from Liz in which she told everyone in the class that they could write a book, and here's how. 1, 2, 3, 101 ways.
Yeah.
And here we were 15 years later, and she was right.
Yeah. You're right. And I know she asked you too, what did you learn?
I don't remember what I told her,
What would you tell her now?
but I can tell her and you that Liz taught me to be brave, to go ahead and say, tell me about Nathan,
Yeah.
to write the eulogy. I've done that since we did the book. To write the obit, to deal with the finances. She taught me to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Good lessons.
Very good lessons. I know for me, one of the things I learned in writing the book was just how much pain Liz had been carrying all those years. She would put on the face, and unless you knew her, you had no idea that she was carrying that devastating pain with her. In fact, she deliberately, it was an intention to work for a temp agency. She worked for the Robert Half agency, and they sent her all over the state. Everyone loved her. She had a zippy learning curve when it came to any kind of software program, and she was conscientious and hardworking and all of those things. and I often said to her, well, when if you find, you go to some of these places as a temp. I mean, she'd be there for months as a temp. I said, chances are they're going to offer you a job. And I said, and you'll be able to settle down and be in one place. And she said, that would be horrible. I wouldn't want to do that at all. And I said, why not? I don't understand. She said, if I settle down, if I get into one place and then get to be friends with people, inevitably they ask, oh, do you have children? And she said it was so hard. She would initially say, I had a son and he died. And the moment she would say, and he died, people didn't want to talk anymore. It was this thing that is dropped in the middle of the room, and conversation ended. So it got to the point where people would ask, so do you have any children? And she would simply say no. And then she felt such sadness at saying that she couldn't say that. That hurt so much. So she decided the best thing to do was just keep moving around, so that the friendships that were the kind of friendship that would go through that deepening phase, just wouldn't have to deal with it. And I think that's one of the reasons that we all treasured her so much. She did let us in. So I know for me that realizing that she carried that level of pain was quite the revelation. If you're in a situation now and people are asking you, well, this looks like a small book, not very big, kind of simple idea, why do you think people should read this book?
Practical suggestions, absolutely every one of them you can do. You can find something in there that you can do. And on the don'ts, as Judy so aptly illustrated, it's more than a list of don'ts. It tells you why not to say that.
Yeah.
So I think it's wonderful.
I think we all have compassion, but sometimes that's a very big word. I think this book gives compassion arms and legs and a script. And of everything that's in it, even in a short book, the piece that I use and remember, and I've used over and over again even since doing it, Liz said the easiest, the kindest response to someone who's grieving is, I'm sorry for your loss.
Period. I'm
Period.
sorry for your loss.
I'm sorry for your loss. And I have found with people who have lost jobs, with people who have lost loved ones.
Yeah, because I know she would often say, you want to make it better, but face the reality, you can't.
Yes.
So just say, I'm sorry for your loss. And on that note, ladies, thank you very, very much for being here. Anne Frazier Walradt from New Jersey, and Judy Hughey from Massachusetts, and Marcia Brown, who was with us in spirit, Paula Chafee-Scardamelia from New York, and Kathleen Barrick from Connecticut, who were here on the first part of page 1. Thank you also to my crew, and to those of you in the viewing audience, please remember the words of Ursula Le Guin, who said, there have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. Find your story and find a way to tell it, but do join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.